Hi, our guest today is Dan Gwalter, an executive coach and founder of No Nonsense Leadership. Hi, Dan. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Joel. How you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. In our last episode, we spoke about the importance of how marketing executives need to select and dominate a niche that leverages their strengths and, I guess, market demands to be effective as a fractional CMO. In this episode, we're going to be discussing how senior marketers can reshape their professional experiences into a compelling story that highlights the transition from an in-house role to a fractional leadership role. We'll be discussing how you can craft your career story, develop a compelling narrative, and communicate your transition to your network. So, Dan, I guess in terms of crafting your career story, a lot of marketers, they will be famous in their market. They'll be famous in their network for working with a particular brand in a particular sector. So transitioning to a fractional role may raise some eyebrows. So how do you craft that career story so your professional network can understand why you've moved from A to B?
Most people that I come across that are interested in transitioning to fractionals, they're what I call third career people. So if we think about the general route that people take through life, you have your first career, which is all of those jobs, waiting tables and working in pubs and doing things that you don't really enjoy. And then you jump out of that into your second career. And it's more your second career where you acquire the majority of your skills and your experiences. You probably do 10 to 15 years in that space. But when I speak to either wannabe transitional fractionals or people that have already made the jump, they tend to say the same thing. They got bored of corporate life, they felt undervalued, they felt that there was a lack of flexibility, or they just weren't doing the things they enjoyed doing. And so they switched. In my opinion, that's a perfectly acceptable answer to the market that asks, well, why did you leave big brand X to go and do your own thing? And in fact, if we look at social media right now, certainly the thing that is selling fractionals the best is that true authenticity, that ability to talk about why I changed and what it felt like to change, and the things that I had to do. So I think in terms of crafting your message to market on day one, it's going to be a case of these are the kind of things that I experienced without bad-mouthing your former employer. These are the things that I was feeling, and this is why I'm here, and this is what I hope to achieve. What have I done? What do I hope to achieve?
And so let's say the marketer has left a company because they just didn't see eye to eye with the CFO. They weren't getting the budget they wanted, or maybe there was a particularly challenging personality that the CEO was. I guess those are kind of, a negative backstory. How do you turn that into positive? Because actually, if I'm a CEO of another business and I'm looking to hire a fractional marketer, I want to hire someone that isn't going to be a thorn in my side. I want them to get on with me as a CEO. I want them to get on with my CFO. So how do I kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, great question. I think that when you leave an organization, there's always a trigger point. And it's really important not to focus on that. If the trigger point happens to be that you didn't get on with the CFO or you're having blazing rows with the CEO, that's probably not the go-to-market message. And I'd be quite upset at any marketer that used that route. That said, you can be very, very general in the reasons that you've moved on. If I look at the most common line that I've used over the last 15 years as to why I dropped out of corporate and into what was at the time freelance consulting, it would be the amount of bureaucracy and red tape within big corporates when you're an employee. Certainly when I was in financial services as a CTO, we would bring in external advisors, consultants, and I watched to see how they could become super productive, get huge results that we couldn't possibly achieve as employees because we were too embroiled in the day-to-day runnings of the organization. So there's one very easy out. I guess the other one is value selling. I know a lot of people in senior roles that realize that actually only 30% of their time is actually spent doing the thing that they're good at, the thing that they enjoy. By the time you've discounted all of those meetings that should have been emails, all of those emails that should have been conversations. And by the time you discounted all of the non-value add activities, you're actually in a quite small number where you're doing the thing that you are still to do.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. And that, that's one of the reasons why I did that myself, really. It's, I think for me personally, the bureaucracy and I guess the cultural norms of certain organizations that perhaps weren't too entrepreneurial or innovative, or there was too much red tape because the compliance team was holding you back creatively. And again, you need to be creative with the regulation or regulatory framework you have to work within. But I think, for me, really, the fractional role opens up the opportunity to work with different types of businesses, more entrepreneurial businesses, innovative businesses, and businesses that don't know what they're doing. They just want that guidance to have an expert come in and just lead them to what marketing best practice looks like. So yeah, you're right. There's definitely always a good way to spin that story. So in terms of highlighting your transferable skills, your unique experience, how do you sort of frame that to your new audience?
It's funny, I remember having a conversation with a CEO while I was an employee, and we were using consultants, which you could now rebrand as fractionals. And I remember saying, they're not doing anything that we couldn't ourselves already do. And his answer to me was, it was about credibility. It was about the fact that, we might not be able to demonstrate as an internal team that we'd be able to go and fix that problem or deliver that outcome. But these external parties were selected because they've done it before. And that's something I took with me, funny enough, when I jumped into consulting, was as a consultant, as a fractional, as a freelancer, you arrive with a certain amount of predefined credibility based on the things that you've done. And that's why you were chosen. You weren't chosen because you are a marketing officer. You were chosen because you're a marketing officer that has done X for Y organization. And it just so happens that this new client, they want the same thing, or they have similar problems. And so when you talk about a compelling narrative, I'm a big fan of making sure that you identify all the different types of social proof that you're going to need in order to talk to these new clients. When we talk about go-to-market messaging, it has to be based on the things that you've actually done. It's not just the achievements; they're a small percentage of the overall, but the outcomes that you've helped organizations achieve. And that becomes your compelling narrative, if you like.
In terms of, I guess, conveying the value that you've offered to previous employers or clients in the past, what would you say is the best way of capturing that? Because some people will write a testimonial or a case study on the website. Some people will do something on LinkedIn. Some people do a video if they're lucky enough to get the former employer or client to spend an hour of their time to do some video capture. What is the best approach for, I guess, being really authentic in that storytelling?
I don't think there's a one size fits all. And it's not about the client and whether the one size fits them. It's about what you intend to do with that information. So if I look at the materials that I've got in the world at the moment, I've probably got landing pages that have got case studies, or I've got user stories on. I've got LinkedIn content that have got testimonials and video snippets. I've got the LinkedIn testimonials themselves and a whole host of other material. So really, what I would say to people is, in the first instance, write your case study and try and write it in two ways. Write it as a named specific case study, but also write it as an industry anonymous case study. And just write that up, single sheet of A4, a story-based format. This was the challenge. This is what we did. This was the outcome. And that's your starter for tech. And then from there, try and get human testimonials to go against it. So if you delivered outcome X, go back to the company concerned and try and identify the relevant stakeholders that would be positively impacted by that, and try and get some sound bites from them. It doesn't have to be a lot, a couple of lines. That just humanizes the case study, and it brings it to life. People really lean into that. And then, my best advice on those is, if you've got those two assets with a bit of humor on it, I can see at least 10 different ways that can be converted into various content types to increase social proof of your messaging. Never underestimate it. I say to people all the time, from the day you start, you should be collecting case studies or creating case studies, collecting testimonials and building up that library, because you'll be amazed the number of times that you're asked for evidence or asked for examples. You'll also be amazed the number of times that a good LinkedIn piece of content with an associated testimonial will drive inbound leads into your ecosystem.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's one of those things, if you don't ask, you don't get. I think some people are kind of hesitant to go back to a former employer or client and say, can you, give me some nice words around the value or, what I did for your company. Some people struggle with that. But I think if you're moving into this portfolio work style, you just have to ask, because you need these assets, you need these sound bites, you need these stories as your social proof, because if you don't have it, no one's going to believe you. I think marketers should be more comfortable than this than, let's say, a fractional CFO, for example, who might be a little bit more hesitant. But I think it's just a hygiene factor you need to get into. It's a good habit to regularly ask. And actually, if you've delivered value for a client, they're going to be only too happy to give you some words or some sound bites for that proof.
There are so many different aspects to this that people don't think about. I know we're going to talk about it in a moment in terms of brand and profile, but where I like to see fractionals get to is that they become synonymous with a phrase. The big ones do. If you look carefully, I know fractional program directors that if somebody said fractional program director, I know exactly who I would go to. And I've seen the same in CTOs, I've seen the same in CMOs, CPOs, CFOs. And that's because those people have really taken good care of their brand and they've worked hard to become the name in that space. That journey begins in case studies. And so when you're asking for testimonials, I have people say to me, I don't want to go back to this person because they're super busy and they might not leave me a testimonial. Well, my viewpoint is if you don't ask, they definitely won't leave you a testimonial. So ask. But if you know they're super busy, then guide them on the process. Because most CEOs that I've ever spoken to, if I go back to them and say, look, we did this thing, it had a great outcome, we all benefited, would you mind leaving me a testimonial? I know you're really busy, but something along these lines, and do the legwork, draft it. You'll be surprised the number of them that will either copy paste that and post it, or will copy paste and adjust it and post it. But you're kind of encouraging the journey. Much better to do that than be left with a blank sheet and not having social proof.
I certainly know on LinkedIn, when you ask for a recommendation, you can pretty much draft the recommendation to someone and they'll wordsmith it, or they'll just press a button and say, yeah, I'm happy with that, off you go. So just put the legwork in. There's no shame to be had by asking someone, tell me that I was good at something. I think as British people, we're not particularly good at that.
Yes, be less British. That's the easy answer.
So I guess when it comes to communicating your transition, so let's take the scenario. You've been an in-house marketer for a brand for several years. You've decided to take the plunge. You want to go into a fractional role. So you've got the narrative, you've got the career story. What's the best approach to communicating that transition? Because you might actually, if you're an in-house person, there's going to be that time, you might be on gardening leave, or you might have a few weeks notice to work. How do you start building that story to communicate that transition?
I do things in a very, very specific order. I think in the last episode, we talked a lot about ICB and niche and getting that clear in mind. The reason for that is it's foundational. If you don't get that right, everything else you do downstream becomes fairly irrelevant. Most people, when they decide that they're going to become fractional, jump onto LinkedIn and start writing content. They start writing great things about why they're great at what they do, and that's fantastic. The problem with that is a misunderstanding of the purpose of content, which is content, certainly since all the recent algorithm changes, is simply there to drive engagement and eyes on your profile. So, in my opinion, once you've identified your ICP and niche, the next thing to do is to work on your profile. Because if that's rubbish, if that looks like an employee's profile or just a duplicate of your CV, then it doesn't matter what you write. People are going to go, content, profile, disappear. And so a lot of time, certainly if I look at over a 7-week program, week 1 is always ICP and niche. Week 2 is also always profile and brand, and getting that nailed to the floor so that you can then go forward and start to talk publicly to the market about what you're doing. If you're super confident that your profile is as it should be, then the easiest way to communicate this to market is through the lens of a human. Just a very authentic, straightforward call out to your network that says, look, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. These are the types of people that I'm interested in speaking to, and let your network work its magic from there. They may surface up some early leads for you. They may not. It very much depends on the target audience that you're going after and whether your network is lifestyle already.
And I guess you have to train that network as well. You need to be able to brief them on how to describe you now, instead of not that guy who is at that brand operating as whatever role, because there is that nuance. And I think it's like, making a referral. You have to make sure you refer the right client to the person you're referring to. It's the same as if you're relying on your network to describe you, you need them to describe you in the right way. So there's probably some merit in having maybe like a very brief briefing sheet that you can email over to say, this is how you would describe me if anyone in your network is looking for this particular expertise. Is that the right way to go?
I do it in 2 different ways. I certainly do use the 1-page briefing, and that's because that's very useful if you're doing outbound engagement via DMs to your network. If you're going through your network list and seeing all these people that may know people and you want to talk to them, then there's quite an easy sort of 3-step, hi, this is what I'm thinking about doing. If you know anybody, would you mind sending them this? And that would work. The other one is, it comes back to it again, the LinkedIn profile. I genuinely can't believe the number of people that do not realize how important that profile actually is to their success, either as a job seeker in the permanent world or as a fractional, which is more a B2B play. The entire purpose of your LinkedIn profile is to act as a low friction landing page, which most marketeers should understand, right? They should get the point that actually the less friction in the process, the more about your ideal customer that landing page is, the more effective it is. What people don't often realize is that LinkedIn profiles are actually indexed by Google, and they rank highly. It's perfectly feasible if you've structured your LinkedIn profile and you've done all the usual SEO techniques that you'd anticipate on a website. If you've done that on your LinkedIn profile, that profile can outrank the vast majority of other websites and end up on page 1 Google search. So it's a really important exercise to undertake. Now, to your point regarding the 1-pager, the biggest mistake that I see with fractionals is when you go to that LinkedIn profile and you scroll down the page, if you get that far and you haven't got all of them zoned out, when you get to the about section and you read it, it reads like a CV. Hi, I'm Dan. I've been a CTO for 25 years. You should hire me because I'm really good at this and I work great in a team or on my own, etc., etc. It's rubbish. The reality is that about section is not actually about you. It's about your ideal customer. And so if you look at the really, really good ones, they use that sort of PAS framework and KNH Solve framework in the about section to talk directly to their ideal customer about a problem. And suddenly that's as powerful as a 1-page briefing note on who I am and what I do. I'll give you a real clear example. I ran a campaign probably 2 years ago, the campaign target was CFOs of SME organizations in financial services who are spending too much money on cloud computing. It's a fairly clear ICP. So my about section for that period of time became, you're a CFO who works in an organization that's got less than 500 people. You believe you're spending too much on cloud computing. So there's your pain. Your agitator was, left unchecked, those costs are only going to continue to increase year on year. And then the solution, over the last 5 years, I've worked with half a dozen organizations, helping them to reduce their cloud computing costs by X. If you fancy a chat, this is the easiest way to do so. That campaign, just inside the about section, surfaced more leads for me over 6 months than anything else I did. That's the power of the profile. If you get it right, it acts as a landing page, it encourages readability, then you will get interest, you will get inbound leads. If you leave it as a grey banner and a CV, the only people that will ever show it any interest are recruiters or hiring managers. And even then, they will now steer clear because it's just not very interesting.
Yeah, that's great advice there. I think, my personal experience is that a lot of marketers don't know how to use LinkedIn properly, or they don't know how to frame their profile. And I think, and I was guilty of it several years ago, where my LinkedIn profile was just kind of an echo chamber for the company I was working for. And so everything, nothing was optimized. And I think actually for me personally, moving into this fractional role really forced me to think differently about my LinkedIn profile and just about the About Us section, the featured section where you can actually present your offer, a high, low and medium value proposition. That is one of the things I guess anyone wanting to come into this fractional world, they have got to be comfortable with LinkedIn. They have to use it every day. They have to use it in the right way. And they probably have to use it completely different to how they've been using it previously in an in-house role. I certainly advocate there's a lot of value you can get from having very good LinkedIn training to really change the narrative on your social profile, because your social profile is on 24/7. It's like a website. It's always there unless you switch it off. And most people in the B2B world, a potential buyer is going to look you up on LinkedIn. And if you're not talking their language, if they're not talking about their pain, they're just going to flip to the next person.
Couldn't agree more. There is one item, there's one area of the LinkedIn profile that I genuinely wish everybody, I wish when you signed up to LinkedIn that LinkedIn actually emphasized this point. If you wanted the most valuable part of the LinkedIn profile, it's the headline. Every single time. It's more valuable than the banner. It's actually more valuable than your profile picture. And the reason I say that is that the LinkedIn headline appears absolutely everywhere. Yes, it is on your profile, all 220 characters of it. But it also appears in comments, in DMs, in your own posts, in search results. And so, believe me when I tell you, the worst thing that you can do with that headline is just make it a repository for job titles and job descriptions. If you use that headline elegantly to talk to the person that you want to talk to, I help CEOs of SME organizations achieve X by doing Y, that type of messaging, then suddenly that headline starts to work for you. And you'd be surprised, if not amazed, the number of times that people glance to your headline in a comment thread and go, well, that's interesting, and bolt through to your profile as a result of that. And so, if you just got the benign CTO for the company name type headline, you really are doing yourself a disservice straight away. So put the effort in, get it right.
Yeah, I think there's a whole episode on LinkedIn we should plan for the future. So, but that's definitely a great nugget for the listeners and viewers to take away. I guess, Dan, that's probably a good place to stop now. So, again, thank you very much for your expert insights. I hope everyone listening to this has found value in what Dan's had to say. In our next episode, we'll be discussing how senior marketing executives need to turn their expertise into engagement. So Dan will again be joining me and sharing his insights into what marketers can do to win more business. So I look forward to seeing you again very soon, Dan.
Cheers, Paul.